Hi guys. So a little bit ago over on Instagram, I asked all of you, what are some fantasy books that you think are overrated, overhyped, and it didn't matter if it was old or new. I just wanted to know which ones do you think are talked about and valued way too much. Jumping into it, I'm going to start with a very juicy one. It says, Storm My Archive is by far Sanderson's weakest adult series. There's multiple things to acknowledge with this comment. First off, the fact that you feel the Storm My Archive is overhyped. That's kind of the main thing, but then also beyond just thinking Storm My is overhyped, thinking it's overhyped within his Cosmere. I'll start off with just the idea that Storm My Archive is overhyped or overrated. So I'm a fan. I'm a big fan. But I do think that it is talked about a lot. I do think a lot of times people, they kind of give you a pass, like, I don't want anything to do with you or hear what you have to say about fantasy if you don't like this series. And that bums me out quite a bit because I understand that it's not for everyone. I do think it's fantastic. Do I think it's hyped? Yes. Do I think it's overhyped? In a sense, because I do feel like people, they'll start channels on BookTube where they're like, hey guys, I'm a fan of books and I want to talk about books, and they'll talk about books and it'll be fun, and then they'll do something related to the Cosmere, often Stormlight specifically, and then that video will do so much better than their other videos, and they're like, well, I guess I'm a Cosmere channel now, and then they'll primarily talk about Cosmere. That is not to imply that they don't care about other books or that they're only doing it for the views and the money or anything like that, but obviously, you want to interact with people, and when you get that interaction, I think a lot of people, they get excited about that. But it's almost a recipe for success if you want to stand out, ironically, talk about this really popular series. That's kind of the way to boost your channel on BookTube. It's not the only series that you can do this with, and I'm not advising people to do this in a sneaky way where it's like, I just care about making my coin. I don't actually even like this series. But I do feel like it's this circle, it's this cycle, I should say, where people want to watch that content, and then a lot of times people making content are like, oh, people like this, so I'm gonna make more of it, and then they're like, yay, more Stormlight stuff, I'm gonna watch this even more. Now, when it comes to the other part of this, that it is hyped within his own works, I kind of agree. So I really like a lot of his other works, and I love the Storm My Archive, but I really love Mistborn. I do think that his writing has gotten better. Obviously, Storm My Archive has come out later, but I think that I feel like Mistborn, I just think it was well done. It was done in a concise amount of time, page count, that sort of thing. The story that is told, the way that he connects things between all three books, I think is fantastic. I really like Warbreaker. That was one single book. Storm My Archive, I love it, but I'm nervous. I'm nervous because it's supposed to be a 10-book series, but it's, he's going to end the first arc after book 5, and that's going to be essentially a completed story. I don't know. I love that series, but I'm like, I hope you stick the landing. Clarify, I don't think it's the weakest, so I don't agree with you 100%, but I do feel like maybe a little bit it gets put on this really tall pedestal. This is the best ever, and like, oh, his other stuff is pretty good too, but I'm like, I like a lot of his other stuff. Moving on from that, because we spent way too much time. This next one is hilarious. Also, I want to keep all of these anonymous, but I wish I could tell you who said this, because it's hilarious. But anyway, it says, Name of the Wind, if one more 30-year-old white dude tells me it's less sexist in book 2, I swear to God. This is honestly fascinating to me. I mean, I expected Name of the Wind to be on the list because it is extremely hyped, but this, apparently, people tell you the second book is less sexist. I have heard very much the opposite, that people are like, I like book 1, but then book 2, there's this like whole plot line with this sex fairy, and apparently Kvothe is like the greatest ever, even though he's never done it before. It's funny regardless. I think that's hilarious. I've made it pretty known that I think the writing is beautiful. I would read something else by Patrick Rothfuss. I don't love Name of the Wind, and I think part of it is just that I can't stand Kvothe, and I get that a lot of people are like, well, yeah, but he's telling his own life stories, so he's gonna make himself look amazing, and I'm like, yeah, well, like, I'm not a fan of narcissists. Unless it's cheeky, unless it's like poking fun at itself. But it's such a beautiful writing style that I feel like that's not what's happening. I don't know. Could you imagine if Name of the Wind had a Giselle-like character where it was that person telling you their life story where you're like, this person's insufferable. This person's super obnoxious. This is not real. They're totally making all this up. But it was really obvious. And maybe that is to some Name of the Wind fans. I'm not sure. But is it overhyped? Is it overrated? I think yes. I personally think so a little bit, but I almost have to add a little asterisk to this and say that there are a lot of people who are really angry at Patrick Rothfuss for taking so long to get book 3 out, and as a result have gone back and lowered their ratings. They're like, I'm never ever reading this series again, and then now they'll say nothing positive about it. They'll just only be negative. They'll be negative to the author, to everything about the book. So even though I think it is very popular and very liked, and I do see it on pretty much every best of list, and I like some other books quite a bit more, I do feel, I'm not gonna lie, I feel a little bad because, you know, I mean, if you liked the book, you liked the book. Because I mentioned Giselle, I'll go ahead and say that First Law was definitely brought up, and I think that sometimes First Law, I love it for what it is. I don't usually like grimdark, and I love the tone of his books. I think they can be quite violent. I think they can be very dark, but I think they're done in a way where it is funny and kind of weirdly tasteful in a strange way. It's just so, this is how people are. This is how the world is. This is what it's like when people are doing it. I mean, like, he doesn't romanticize things, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And he does it in a way that's amusing, and so I appreciate it. However, I personally, sometimes the way I hear people talk about First Law, specifically this trilogy, I am like, I didn't love the ending. I really didn't love the ending. I felt like we meandered a lot of times, and I'm not even a plot-driven reader, but sometimes I'm like, what are we doing right now? What do the characters want? What's happening? And it did affect my enjoyment a little bit. I did feel like sometimes characters would have really intense injuries and we'd spend so much time with them with these injuries, and then other times characters would get insane injuries and then they're like, I'm fine, and they would, I don't know, it made it feel, for all the realism that's put in there, sometimes there were these other things and I'm like, that's almost like when the magic solves problems. I think it's great. I am a fan. But I think specifically here on BookTube, it's become a staple. It's become the thing that a lot of people are reading, and it's almost one of those like, well, but have you read First Law? And I get if it's not other people's things. I get that if you don't like it, I probably would agree with your reasons why. There was a specific submission that said that his characters are okay at best. I don't agree with that. I think his characters are the best thing that he does, but if you don't like his characters, you know, that's totally your thing. I think he does sometimes rely on repetition a little bit, and it's fun, and like Logan Nine Fingers, say one thing about Logan, say that he's super lovable, or Glocta is just like, I'm in pain, and at some point you're like, we know. I don't know, it makes it feel like you know them because there's these specific things about them that you're like, yeah, that's like a very Logan thing to do, or like Pharaoh is really angry all the time. But I still think his characters are great. I did ask specifically in one category for adult and then another category for young adult. And so this particular one says they don't know if it's young adult or adult, but From Blood and Ash. So this is not a series that pops up on best of fantasy lists. I have read the first one. It's not exactly my usual cup of tea. I will link my vlog where I read this in the description bar. It's a book that a lot of people are like, oh, it's super sexy because it's a romance fantasy. And I was like, well, let's see what this is all about. And I was like, I'll read it around Valentine's Day. And for a long time, I'm like, when does it get sexy? Because right now it's just a lot of like, I'm innocent and I want to experience kisses and stuff. Then toward sort of other parts of the book, it's like, oh, here it is. But not my kind of romance. But it's entertaining. And I think it's more of the experience of the same way when you go to see a ridiculous action movie where you're just like, this is so over the top and this is so ridiculous, but you have fun with it. I feel like that's the vibe, but it is very talked about right now. I see so many posts on Instagram with this book. I feel like I actually picked this book up because I saw it talked about on Instagram so much. And then I started to see other people talking about it here on BookTube. Friends were reading it. Other booktubers that I really enjoy were reading it. I'm like, well, let's see. And I can see why people think it's overhyped. It is talked about a lot. This is talked about a lot. This next one is hilarious to me. It says, Jade City, Jade War. They're books where nothing happens to people I don't care about. I feel you on that. I don't think that they're nearly as talked about as some of the other ones. So I hesitate to say that they're overhyped just because I don't really see them on best of lists. I still think, like I just said, in comparison, they're not as discussed. So I don't know if I would label them as overhyped, but I do see people talk about them like they're the greatest thing ever. And I mean, I can understand why people like them. Absolutely. I can definitely see the appeal. But I personally didn't enjoy it, which is, of course, going to color my opinion of them a little bit. But I get it. I totally get why people like it so much. The strange thing to me, though, is that a lot of it feels kind of familiar. It's really cool in that you're taking some familiar tropes about mafia type stories or these gang type stories and you're putting a fantasy spin on it. So I can see where it's original in that way, but there's so many things about the story that feel familiar also. I don't know, it's interesting. It'll be really interesting, I think, to see how popular this book is in 5 or 10 years, to see, I mean, I think there's an adaptation in the works, so that'll definitely affect its popularity and what people think of it, but I understand why people like it. It wasn't personally for me, but I don't know if I'm going to say it was overhyped. This next one, it says, The Dresden Files. You shouldn't have to read 5 books of a series for the sexism to get readable. I do think it's interesting. I see The Dresden Files pop up on so many best of lists, and I'm not trying to bash the series. I think that I know it's not the same at all, but similar to the feeling that I get out of books like From Blood and Ash, I get out of Dresden, where I'm like, this is a fun time. It's just like, let's just like enjoy ourselves. And I don't really take them too seriously. I have heard that as the series goes on, that it gets more serious. But initially, because I only read the first few, I was like, well, these are fun. Yeah, whatever. And I totally understand why people have such a good time with them. But I'm a little confused because sometimes they're put on lists with some other books that I'm like, these are different. Like, one is not like the others, and that one is Dresden Files. I do want to make very clear, I don't think that something having that entertaining factor makes it lesser and that you have to have it be really deep and serious for it to be taken seriously. But I'm just surprised because I often see it up there with some other series that seem very different from it. That's all I mean. Somebody said anything Blanderson. I already talked about him for a long time, so I won't go into details, but I understand. I mean, Sanderson is talked about a lot. All the time. He's talked about all the time. This next one is cute. It says Wheel of Time. Even though I like it, there are entire books in the series with virtually no plot. Wheel of Time is very interesting in that I think most fans would agree with at least some form of what you were saying, in that, you know, everybody's like, there's the slog. There's like some of the books that you just like, you have to get through. And then there are some people that feel like the pacing isn't great, or they feel like the characterization isn't great, or they feel like the way that the women and the men's relationships is written is annoying. And I think it's great that fans can be like, yeah, these things are true, but like, I love it anyway, because that's, I feel like, a healthy attitude toward a series. But I also feel like it's kind of a staple, and I mean, I don't love it. Because of the show, I think a similar thing is happening as to what I described with the Stormlight Archive series. It is going to get you views to talk about it, and then people who have loved it and have the nostalgia for it are going to want to see other people talking about it, and it's that same cycle. But I understand how it stands out now because it is an older work, and a lot of these other ones are a little bit newer, and so it's got a different tone to it. It feels a little bit different, and so I can see why a lot of people still really value it, especially a lot of people, the nostalgia factor that I was just mentioning, that's going to play a huge role, and people are going to love the impact that that series had in their lives growing up, or that just at some point in their life they read. There's also something to be said of a series where you're with those characters for a very, very long time. I think it definitely builds a very strong, almost loyal fan base. But I agree that it is a little bit... I just think that all those things that even a lot of the fans will agree on, I think that those things are... I agree with those. There are quite a few more that I would love to chat about. If you are interested in seeing a part 2, let me know. I would be happy to do it. I also did ask people YA submissions, and so I will probably be doing this again for those books. I can pretty much guess what's going to be on that. Sarah J. Maas, I'm sure Six of Crows, Grisha, I'm sure that's going to be on there. Probably people are going to say Cassandra Clare, Cruel Prince. I'm guessing those are going to be on there. It'll be interesting to see if I'm correct in that. But anyway, let me know if you would like to see part 2 to the adult fantasy that are overrated. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you so much, everybody who made your submissions, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.